Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Siebold. I'm a managing partner advisor here at FlowerHire. This is my shameless plug. Last time I'm going to mention it. FlowerHire, building a conscious cannabis community one hire at a time. Today, I'm joined by Aubrey Estrin, James Brobyn. Cherissa Jackson is going to meet us momentarily. She's going to be on. They're going to introduce themselves momentarily to discuss their experiences in and out of cannabis and how they believe military service can translate to better outcomes in the cannabis space. But before we start, I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists and speakers today for not just the service that you continue to do inside of the cannabis space, but the military service that you've done prior. Thank you again for joining me. I believe it's a conversation, a topic that does not get enough focus. Not just in cannabis, but nationally. And I'm excited to have you guys shed some light. So Aubrey, starting with you, if you could, I'd love to hear about yourself, your experience in the military, how you've come to cannabis, what you currently do within it, and then more importantly, where are you calling from in terms of in the United States?
Okay, so my name is Aubrey. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. I entered into the Navy when I was 19 years old. I started at school and kind of wasn't ready for all of that and decided to go into the military. And it was the best decision I ever made. I picked the shortest length of schooling, which was 4 months for an aviation machinist mate. And I ended up in Virginia Beach due to Hurricane Katrina, which ended up messing up some barracks stuff. So I ended up in Virginia Beach. And from there, I went to Norfolk and I worked on Super Hornets. And then I worked on HM4. I was at HM14 and I worked on H60 Bravos. And I mostly did air traffic control, flight line. I ran the flight line. And then I had 2 daughters while I was in the service. And I did a lot of corpsman work. I did career counseling, PS work, a bunch of office stuff. And then to finish up my career, I was in charge of the auxiliary retail unit and first lieutenant, which, if you're not familiar, is essentially facilities and our military version of a 7-Eleven that funds our emergency funds for sailors in need, and also our Christmas party, our family picnics, all of the mandatory fun that the military makes us do and contributes to our well-being. And then after that, I went back to Pennsylvania and I went to school to Penn State University for psychological and sociological sciences with a minor in management. And right about when I was done, I started with Beyond Hello as an assistant manager in the Westchester location in Pennsylvania. And I was promoted maybe about 4 months after that to general manager. And I've been doing that ever since. I know it's a very strange route to go into the military and then pivot that to cannabis, but I think that there are so many things that streamline between the two, whether it's mental health regulations, so many different reasons why they go hand in hand, even though the messy legislation of it. And that's where I am now.
Thank you. Thanks for kind of giving me the overview. James, please introduce yourself if you could.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I appreciate the whole FlowerHire team for having us on here. And Aubrey, thanks for the intro. I'm James Brobyn. I'm the founder and CEO of American Fiber Company. We're a small multi-state private company operating in Delaware and Michigan. We also have a performance line of cannabis products that are Farm Bill compliant that we sell around the country. My background, I'm a Philadelphia native. It just happens to be that Aubrey and I are from the Philly region in cannabis and geographically relatively close to each other, which is nice. But I grew up in Philadelphia and enlisted when I was 19 as well, into the Marine Corps. I was a Huey crew chief, and which was a mechanic on helicopters, on Hueys as well as Cobras. And then I flew in the back as a door gunner. Fortunately, I had some pilots that were Naval Academy graduates. They saw something in me, and they really helped push me towards kind of going to college. And I was very fortunate to have that support and ended up going to the Naval Academy, was commissioned out of there as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, as an infantry officer, spent 2 years, spent 13 years total in. I was in 3rd LAR Battalion, deployed to Iraq for a couple years back in 06, 07, 08. Was wounded in 06. And ultimately got out in 2010 because my daughter was born during my last deployment, and I felt like the Marine Corps had gotten their pound of flesh, and I got my pound of flesh, and it was time to move on, honestly. And I wanted to spend time with my kid. Fast forward, I ended up, running and scaling a charity called the Travis Maney Foundation, which is a veteran serving organization in the Philadelphia region that serves families of fallen service members and vets. And in that process, really got into kind of veteran wellness, as well as a lot of the issues around vets. And, when Pennsylvania was kind of starting to pop in 2016, during the first round, that was, a cannabis company reached out to me, and I, decided to kind of go after and help them raise some money and start to learn the business. And it seemed like a good fit to find alternative medicine for vets. And, fast forward, it's been quite a ride. I'm partner in an international cannabis company, spent a bunch of time in Colombia and Canada, and now run American Fiber Company full time, and been kind of grinding on that for a while. So thanks.
Again, thanks for kind of giving me the overview of kind of the way that you've come into the space, and more importantly, your own military experience. And just, I think that the thing that's really interesting, Cherissa, great timing. All right. How are you? You made it. That's sweet. We were just doing introductions. Everyone, Cherissa Jackson. Cherissa, hi. I know you just came from DC, so
yeah. But
if you could, Aubrey and James just introduce themselves. Tell the folks out there in TV land about yourself, where you served in the military, how you came to cannabis, and then what you're currently doing now. Good timing.
Yeah, thank you guys for your patience. I do appreciate it. My name is Cherissa Jackson. I am a retired Air Force nurse. I completed 23.5 years and 14 days in the Air Force. I can get it down to the seconds if I really had to. I survived 3 deployments, twice to Iraq, once to Afghanistan. I came back from Afghanistan after a near-death experience and was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. When I retired in 2013, my goal, my purpose was to change the stigma of PTSD. So for a few years, I was doing a lot of work in the PTSD arena, helping soldiers, anyone with trauma, normalize the conversation. I wrote a book, At Peace, Not in Pieces, about my own journey with post-traumatic stress and dealing with all of the multiple deployments as a single mom with twin daughters. It did really, really well on Amazon. It's still out there on Amazon currently. Because of all the efforts that I've done in the veteran space, I'm titled America's Combat Nurse. So a lot of times you will Google America Combat Nurse and I come up because of all the work that I've done in the cannabis space for veterans. Currently, I am the CEO and founder of Decode, where we are mapping medicine's healthiest outcomes using your DNA to actually match you to your cannabinoids and terpenes that work best for you, saving you time and money. And as we all know, a lot of veterans don't have a lot of money and we value our time. So Decode is helping anyone, not just veterans, find their cannabinoids and terpenes sooner, saving them time and money. And so that's been what I've been doing since 4/20 of this year when we launched. I'm in preparation of going to Atlanta tomorrow because Decode was selected by the Atlantic Hawks and by Amazon to be their chosen veteran organization to host for Veterans Day. So you guys may see me on the big television tomorrow at the Hawks game. But other than that, I'm just so honored to be here with the other panelists, here to be a support, here to be an advocate for veterans with cannabis. And I'm just so happy to be part of the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And I did mention, when we started, thank you again, the service you've already done, the service you continue to do, shedding light on this topic within cannabis, but also just generally, I think is something that needs to happen more. But as it pertains to cannabis, it's kind of a good segue into the next kind of question I have. Being a civilian, it's really hard for me to imagine or really kind of mimic, the experiences that you've had, and more importantly, how those can transfer into a work setting, or more importantly, a demanding space, an entrepreneurial endeavor like cannabis. So in terms of like skill transferability, like what are the structural and cultural gaps in cannabis that you've seen or in your experience? And have you seen, or do you think the service that you've had in the military can address those gaps? Maybe Cherissa, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I think our skills are transferable. It's just a matter of how do you transfer them when you get out the military. I mean, particularly for me as a nurse, everyone thought, she's a nurse, she can go and work at any hospital. It should be easy breezy to transition. But contrary to the case, I still had to civilianize. And that took me a while to do, even though I had leadership, abilities and leadership responsibilities. It was still hard for me to kind of relate. And even still now, I find it difficult when I have people that don't want to go that extra mile and who don't want to stay there and be the last one at the office. And it's just one of those things where our skills are transferable. It's just a matter of how the veteran used those skills. I call it repurposing your skills, because no matter what you do, your skills can be repurposed. And I also think that the community as a whole need to value what we do bring to the table. And we bring some great skills that the average civilian may or may not have experienced. So I think it's twofold, not just on the veteran, but also in the community to see our value and us know that our skills are definitely transferable and definitely repurposable.
That's great. I mean, Aubrey, in terms of, repurposing skills, with your experience, how is that translated not just to Beyond But Hello, but also, has that also, in taking those skills and purposing them, have you been able to kind of put that into action with the teammates that you have that you oversee at Beyond Hello?
Well, I think what I want to focus, what Cherissa said was absolutely correct. Our skills are transferable. And I think people forget sometimes that they refer to the military and each branch as like the largest corporation in the world, and they function as such. So, and they also spend an exorbitant amount of money on making sure that they are not wasting man hours and that they are doing things proficiently and effectively to not waste time. And they also, on the same side, have seen the research about putting personnel first in certain circumstances and needing to do that in order to get the best out of their people. And in cannabis right now, I think for me, the most relevant thing is that in experiencing the military doing that, bringing in folks when you transferred from paper data to a tool program now that's all computers, and I was a worker doing that and watching how they did that in the best, most efficient way, and how they came back every 3 months and they wrote their notes, and then they came back and they made changes, and then they came back and they made changes again. And I think doing that in such an efficient way and watching that happen when you go into a civilian world where it might be the company's first time implementing a new procedure or a new policy that changes everything, and everyone's a little bit nervous about how to do that. Folks in the military have probably done that multiple times in each station that they were at, depending on what they were doing at that time. And it's so easy to just utilize those skills and apply them in what you're doing now and say, okay, well, we'll look at it again in 2 months and see what works, what doesn't work, and change it. And that's something that's really hard to teach, and that the military does really, really well at implementing new things and finding what works, new technologies, and putting those in. I think I went through in aviation 4 different software programs for Super Hornets and all over. But we had to change systems 4 different times, and that's not easy. It's challenging and can make people pull their hair out. But the military really teaches you grace and how to pivot and how to stay calm. And those are things that I think are invaluable.
Completely agree. James, please.
I mean, it's everything they're saying spot on. I think it's, as I think of, values that's bring to the workforce, I always like to think about it as a competitive advantage. As a business owner and someone that's hiring, I want a competitive advantage over all the other operators. This is a brutal business. Anyone that says it's not isn't in the business, frankly. And the one thing, and I think Aubrey said it, grace is a good way to put it. But there's very few places in the world where you live in this highly regulated environment, down at the smallest unit level, but the macro level is always changing and affecting everyone below you. So it's this weird, like, everyone's focused on operating within a highly regulated environment, but at any given moment, we call them the Marine Corps Semper Gumby. You always got to be flexible, right? Because it's going to change. And there's one thing in this industry that I found from day one till now is it's never been a straight line. And my employees that can adapt, react, and work within this changing environment, have grace in it, be respectful in it, and do things with integrity. That's what I'm looking for in employees. That's why we have a bunch of vets in our team. That's why we have, military spouses on our team. It's really important. It's not because it's more of a competitive advantage, and it also, my other teammates get the benefit of their experience being able to work in that environment in a lot of cases for a bunch of years. Most civilians just don't have that experience. It's not a better or worse thing. They're just different experience bases. The military is just extremely good at saying, putting you in these new environments and saying, go figure it out.
Yeah.
Giving you enough support, but not quite enough to get there. And you're filling in most of the dots yourself.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way up to the general officer level. My last job, I worked for General Bailey, who's, if you get a chance to look him up, the guy's, he's an amazing human. But when he became a general from colonel, he was sent up to the National Command Authority. This was like 2007. So we're in the middle of Iraq and Afghanistan. Things are hot. He gets put down there day one. He gets handed a book that says, hey, we got 2 weeks. We have basically a 2 week turnover. And then the guy got pulled that he was turned over with like the next day. The day after that, he's on the phone with Donald Rumsfeld getting hit up with like, hey, what's this? What's this? What's this? There's not a lot of room. You got to go figure it out. And it goes all the way from the private to the general. It doesn't really change. So that's what I look for. And I think that's what the competitive advantage of vets are, specifically in cannabis, because of the type of industry it is. So,
Hey, Michael, if I can add on to what James and Aubrey just said, I think what we know how to do really well is we know how to reset and pivot. I know being deployed 3 times and going to Balad and going to Balad again and going to Afghanistan, not knowing, I was never afraid of the unknown because I knew once I landed and I was at those bases, I knew how to reset what I need to do in order to accomplish that mission and pivot when I needed to pivot if that particular thing didn't work out. And I think for us at We Decode, it's important that we have those employees that's very agile. You got to be able to shake, you got to be able to pivot when we need you to pivot. And I think that's one of the things, 2 of the things that the military really taught us well is being able to reset and pivot when need be.
I mean, it's interesting when we talk about the structural gaps, like cannabis is interesting. And I say this a lot, that sometimes it often feels more like a space and less like an industry because, well, in a way, in so many instances, it's no longer legal, it's just illegitimate. And the culture within cannabis in so many instances, like as a group, feels really visceral, but sometimes on the company level, it feels kind of like companies are going through the motion to kind of grow into themselves, but sometimes they don't have some of the themes that you're talking about that have been kind of superimposed on you by virtue of your experience, flexibility, adaptability, respect, integrity, agility, the ability to reset and pivot. All of these things are so consequential to an entrepreneurial environment. I mean, the real question I'm kind of curious about, and a lot of people in the audience are curious about because they're messaging is, why is it that we're not seeing more of people much like yourselves that have this experience, that have that thinking, that have that experience in a place like cannabis? And we had a conversation here. Do service members in joining the cannabis space, are they at risk in terms of the way in which the government might be appropriating support, right, via organizations versus the VA? Are there things that are not being discussed as to why maybe we're not seeing as many veterans? Anyone can start with that question.
I'll start with that, Mike. I think there's a lot of factors. Since we have an audience of veterans here, I want to dispel the rumor that your disability will be, in any way taken away if you decide to go into the cannabis space. Let that be known that that is not true. That is false. I have documentations from the VA. I've gone to many conferences where the suicide prevention office from the VA has been at these conferences to try and dispel this rumor that is not true. So that's number one. I think if veterans understood that and believe that and trust that, they want to be in this cannabis space. They just don't know how. So I think if people like us on this panel educate our fellow comrades, fellow soldiers, wingmen about the opportunities, I think they will jump at the opportunity. I've had so many veterans come to me and say, hey, Cherissa, how did you get into the cannabis space? You're a nurse, you were an officer, and you're still a nurse out here in the civilian world. Why aren't you scared? What is there to be scared about? If I don't do it now, when will I do it? And I think veterans just need to trust the system and trust that their disability is not going to be taken away. They need guidance, need mentorship from people like us that's open to telling veterans how we've done it, our journey, and they can figure it out. I do believe anybody that wants to be in this cannabis space can be in this cannabis space, but you got to walk that line and you got to figure it out, and you got to figure out how you're going to separate yourself from everybody else. And the main thing out of all things that we've all had to experience is funding. You got to be able to find money. And if you can't do that, and then you can't get your dreams, your hopes in this cannabis space cross that finish line, you know, we don't want to waste anybody's money and time. So I think those are the things that kind of deter a lot of veterans, is just not knowing, and how can they, and if there's anybody out there to support them and guide them along the way.
You know, in terms of, I mean, Aubrey, James, any additional color, please?
I think just one thing I think that would be remiss if we didn't bring up that is an issue that I think impacts vets in their decision is Second Amendment issues. And this is not meant to be a discussion around that, but that does prevent a lot of veterans from making that decision because they're concerned about not being able to own a gun. So it's a lot of just education we need to do collectively. But there's a lot of these very intractable, challenging issues that are roadblocks in a lot of cases. I think it's really interesting with Missouri passing. It's really interesting to see what that looks like out there, right? So I do think there are some barriers to entry, but I think just like a lot of stuff, it's educational, and educational fix most of that, and most of it's optics for the individuals or the companies. The reality, it doesn't really match what people think is going to happen, and that's really the truth. And I think you said it well. Cannabis is legitimized around this country. I mean, whether one state or not is approving adult use or not, like, this country loves cannabis. They want more cannabis. It's the most bipartisan issue I've found. It's freaking awesome that way because it's the most unifying thing out there when everything else is kind of crazy. And again, I think that's interesting enough, or a nice kind of, you know, focal point within that industry, and maybe, you know, give us a guide star there. So.
Aubrey, anything in addition?
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, I would like to speak of a personal thing that, you know, I applied for a VA loan, and unfortunately I work in the cannabis space, and it went all the way up to Veterans United to the top. And they said, unfortunately, they receive subsidies from the federal government. And until the federal government says that it's legal, I am not allowed to get my VA loan, which stinks, and it's the worst. But I feel the need to be vocal about it, because if people don't hear stories like mine, a veteran, a mom of two, who has now found an amazing space where I'm helping other veterans and people in general find medicine, get off prescription pills, 13 plus prescription pills. And I deserve that VA loan. And there are tons of states every time we vote saying that they agree with me that I deserve that. So I think it's important to know that it is a little bit messy, but on the other side of that, I think it can be a tricky place to find a home when you leave the military. And I have, despite the messiness, I have definitely found a home here in the cannabis space, regardless of some of the sacrifices I'm making to be in that space. I think it's worth it, but I do think it's important to speak about some of the obstacles that we will inevitably face with the legislation being messy.
Well, and I think that's really important, right? Too, it's like a focus between. I think if we focus on, you know, instead of like helping vets and giving them handouts, like, what if we focus on the cannabis industry, get them freaking jobs in the industry? If you want to like make it hard for the DoD to say no, is give them a very direct correlation, and connect them from active duty into these manufacturing jobs, into these highly technical jobs. Like, we start doing that, it's going to be harder for DoD and these other groups to continue to say no to us, right? And I think it's really important to kind of, where do we focus as veterans to kind of influence the industry? I think there are intractable problems at the federal level, and because we're federal employees, when we get out and we have all these other things, it's messy. I think you're right, Aubrey. But the industry is like amazing, and we need more vets in it. And I do think the more kind of folks we get kind of oriented in this direction in the cannabis industry, working there, connect them directly from active duty into it, those type of things, like that's where we're going to start really seeing a change there, I think.
And James, I do get a lot of veterans, just come to my booth or to my table or find me on social media asking, how do I get certified? Because, you just can't walk into a dispensary and get a job. You have to have some type of skill, some type of certification of some sort. So there are veterans out here that want to learn. There are veterans out here that want to get certified. And I think we as a collective should rally behind them and help them figure that out, help them navigate that. If that's us, sending them to an academy like the one in New Jersey that supports cannabis education, or if there's a certification that they can't afford, if there's things within our companies that we can give them some type of stipend to get a certification, we as veterans can rally around them and support them with that, because they do want to be in the industry. And we have to be those motivators and those encouragers that say, okay, if you do want to be, then let's hear the steps and see how motivated they are to take the initiative to take those steps. And once we do that, we will see more veterans in the cannabis space, because they'll become more comfortable and they'll feel that it's inviting. And I don't sense that veterans feel that it's inviting or encouraging, because people like us are not out here speaking the gospel of how great it is. So they're still kind of standoffish about it, because they don't even know where to start. So we begin to educate veterans on where to start to get in this space. I think we will see more in the workforce in the cannabis space.
I completely agree. I mean, while we were speaking, and Aubrey, thank you and Cherissa and James, thank you for sharing your own personal experiences. I mean, Nurse Deb McCauley, who's joining us, she's in the crowd, said, this is discriminatory. You're talking about people who have taken a tremendous amount of time to appropriate their skills and their want and their loyalty to the military, and then in trying to support themselves and their families, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, trying to perpetuate their families. The fact that we live in this space and time where after everything, even then, you're called into question by virtue of not who you are and what you've done, but where you are in terms of a space, in terms of, the stigmatization that still dogs, anyone that participates in this, whether or not truthful. I think that's the thing that, to your point, Teresa, about education being the thing that's the way that we work against that tide. So to that point, I mean, that's the thing that's also interesting. We have a lot of veterans that this can be circulated to, both active service members, former service military members. Where can they find resources? What are some of the instances, the groups that can act as a bridge between, yourselves in the cannabis space, between themselves having skills, or more importantly, just generally, where can they turn to get more acclimated to what this is?
I mean, I think it's us who are already in the cannabis space can help veterans get acclimated. And before, I continue my remarks, I want to say to Aubrey, I'm sorry that you had that experience with your VA loan. That should not have happened. And I can only imagine who else out here had that same experience. And we as veterans have to come together and rally behind if this is something that's constantly happening in the cannabis space, because it should not be happening. Back to your question, Mike, I think for me, one of the organizations that I go to is ASA, American for Safe Access. They do a lot of work in the cannabis space, and I know a lot of veterans are part of that group. So for anyone that's looking to get into the cannabis space, check out American for Safe Access. They are very, they do a lot of work in the community here in Maryland, and I'm sure across the country they do a lot of work. But just a simple Google search. I mean, when I got into the space 2 years ago, I did a Google search, found who was in the industry, and reached out to them myself, and they welcomed me with open arms and said, hey, whatever you need, what can we do to help you? I mean, but I had a plan, right? I told them specifically what I wanted to do, and they were able to provide those resources to me. So I think everyone should take that initiative to Google, search, connect with people, find that network of folks, go to conferences. I'm endless going to conferences. I'm tired going to conferences, but it's so important because you just never know who you're going to meet. And I think those would be places where folks can find those resources that ordinarily they wouldn't find through a network, online, is by going to conferences and meeting people there.
That's great.
I would say LinkedIn. I mean, honestly, reach out, guys. I mean, I try to answer everyone that reach out to me through LinkedIn that's a vet and try to at least respond to them. And if it lines up, we set up a call. I mean, I do it all the time. Several of my employees came that way. Reach out. People want to help. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Like, find a common connection in the veteran space with someone on LinkedIn that's in cannabis, and I promise you'll find someone that's going to talk to you, which is awesome. Which you're not going to find a lot of cases. So that's an opportunity for vets if they take advantage of it and do a little bit of the work. No one's going to hand you anything. No one should hand you anything. So get out there and do the work. But people want to help. I guess that's the question. Like, put yourself out there. There's a lot of vets in the industry, because the industry needs professionals and adults in the industry. Like, that's why we're starting to see more of us in there. And that's exciting. And there's a lot of opportunity there, but you got to reach out and put yourself out there. Aubrey won't know about you. Cherissa won't know about you. I won't know about you unless you put yourself out there, and reach out. Everyone's willing to help. And that's been my experience.
One thing I'd like to say too is that I think when, you think about being a vet and maybe some of the physical ailments that you have, mental health ailments that you have, and self-medicating on your own before you had medical programs, and figuring out what worked for you to survive and to get through day to day. And now realizing that that is a skill in itself, and that your journey with cannabis, figuring out what has saved you and worked for you, can now be transferable to tell somebody else how to do that journey as well. And if you're, you have folks that are creating products in their homes, head trauma sprays for your hair for head trauma, and you have people that are creating these products in their houses and trying to get them out to folks that need them. And if you're somebody that medicates and you can utilize your journey and that information as a skill. And so if you're at a dispensary and somebody comes to the counter and needs help with head trauma and needs to know those terpenes, those cannabinoids, those products that will help them best, that's a skill you could use to help them. And we're looking for those. So some places do need a certification, but others, myself, my dispensary, if you can tell me your recommendations for your ailments, I'd hire you, because you can help folks. So if you have that knowledge, that is a skill in itself. That's not taught, it's self-taught. And it's really important to know that that's something that you can utilize.
And Mike, if I could interject something, I'll talk about my experience, right? I was afraid. I'm not going to tell you any lies. I was afraid to come out and say to people, number one, that I'm an advocate for cannabis, right? Because I was caught up in that stigma, right? Oh my God, Cherissa's taking drugs. Oh my God, she's advocating for drugs. And I even heard it, through my network. All you want us to do, Cherissa, is get high. I'm just like, no, cannabis is medicine. And so I think if veterans feel comfortable being able to say, yes, I am a cannabis advocate, yes, I'm a cannabis user, and they reach out to people, they're going to get an open arm of folks wanting to support. But you can't be straddling the fence. You can't want help and want to be in the industry, but then you can't be proud of wanting to be in the industry. Like me, everywhere I go, I'm like, I'm a cannabis advocate. I wear t-shirts that say cannabis saves lives. Cannabis is medicine. I walk through the airport and I get so many people stopping me, because it's not even about getting high. I educate folks, strangers, about the efficacy of cannabis, dispelling those myths, dispelling those old naysayers and the things that people taught us way back in the war on drugs. I'm out here dispelling those things so that veterans and others can be comfortable saying loud and proud, I'm a cannabis advocate. I have a cannabis business. I had to tell my parents. So let me tell you, from the down south, people that was like, don't use drugs, they now know I have a cannabis business because I had to be bold and confident in saying I'm doing this regardless of who thinks it's the best thing to do, the right thing to do. But I know it's best for me, and I know it's best for veterans out here who are choosing not to use opioids. And for me to be educated on that was important. So I think we have to be bold, we have to be brave. And when you come from behind that cloud and step into the light and find support, find help, I believe veterans will soar in this industry.
I absolutely agree. I think that's a really good point too, which is, the commitment that you have or that you've experienced outside the scope of cannabis to come into it, right, it's one of those instances where you have to just, despite the fears and in many instances, the discrimination and the practices of being, wrongfully labeled something. I think a lot of it's in kind of just asking the belief in what this is going to be long term, right? A lot of people are staking claim to what cannabis is because they know it's unfulfilled promise so far, but we know eventually it's going to be something that, is not subject to insane taxes, something that is going to be normalized. But in the interim, right now, as we speak, it's something that is early. And so we have to be very honest about the fact that we are absorbing a big cultural migration of how we feel about this, the way that we orient ourselves around what this is, not just as a medicine, as a product, but as a nation, what we want it to be, who we want to be amidst it. And more importantly, among that, which is a big reconciliation, what are we doing specifically to the people who've already paid service to in other ways? How are we going to propel veterans specifically in something that is a once in a lifetime opportunity? How are we enabling them? Are we equipping them? Are we dissuading them? So all the things that you talked about today, I think really shed a lot of light on your own personal experiences. And I think a lot of the intimidation that someone might feel, being, in a position that you once were and realizing that they can come into this space and have a path forward. I think that should really make people feel enabled, right? Have them feel equipped. While we were talking, by the way, some of the people out in the audience were asking for your information to reach out to you, with your permission. We want to circulate that so they can reach out. That way they can get a heads up conversation with you in terms of, what is the next step after being sure that they want to commit. So to that, there are some other questions that were received. I'm just going to kind of go through them. Let's see. Well, this is a good conversation because as of last night, and this is going to age hysterically someday, last night there were 5 states for adult use on the ballot, 2 of which passed for adult use, Missouri and Maryland, right? Cherissa, you're in Maryland specific, right? Yes. Here we go. What do you think, or how do you feel, or more importantly, what are your expectations and where do you think cannabis is going to go from here? Because we're going to keep getting this step-by-step process of getting new markets, new consumers, new educational opportunities for everyone, really, not just veterans. What are you looking forward to? How are you preparing for that future? Aubrey, let's start with you this time. What do you think the future holds? Next steps.
Well, I think it's exciting with the election and new legislation happening. I think it's exciting to see the possibilities of the space changing to benefit us, to help us have a little bit more stability, and in that we will be able to make it a more comfortable working environment with the support of our government and having things operate under the same, for example, the military, if you're working on a jet in Florida or California or, Afghanistan, you're working from the same standard operating procedure and you're doing the same exact thing. And it's just not the case in cannabis at all. It's so dramatically different. If you're reading an SOP, you could be reading an SOP for 7 different states and has 7 different ways to do things. Or, you as an executive are leading groups of people that are doing things in 10 different ways, depending on what state you're operating in. And that can be very challenging. So for me, I think getting rid of the stigma, passing legislation is all a positive movement. And also, I think hopefully with the legislation, we might be able to go back and hopefully get some representation for groups that need to be more in the cannabis space, like veterans and Black and brown folks, I think that it might be easier to get those folks up higher in these spaces with the backing of legislation.
Absolutely. Cherissa, you were going to say something, please.
Yeah, I think for me, it's concerning, that all of these states are coming on board. And I say concerning because I just left a conference in New Orleans, and I was at a meet and greet, and there were vendors there, and there were products that look very similar to regular store-bought products, Skittles, gummy bears, things that are name brand items, Cheetos, that were infused with THC. So immediately as a nurse, I started thinking, what will happen if someone bought these same items that looked like the typical safe products, and a kid actually ate 600 milligrams of Skittles because they thought it was regular Skittles. And for New Orleans to not have regulatory protocols in place, and for other states to not have regulatory protocols in place, and there's no standardization happening across the entire country, that's concerning, because what's going to happen is a lot of those folks are going to show up in my ER because they're going to be taking these products. They don't know how much of these products they're taking. They don't know what's inside of these products, and it's unsafe. So though it's a positive that these states are coming on board, I would want to see more standardization, more regulatory protocols in place, making sure products are being tested, making sure dispensaries are allowing those letters of authenticity and their certificates to be available for people to see that their products are without pesticides and things of that nature. So my concern, though positive and hopeful, even with Maryland, I'm still on edge to find out how are they going to make sure that this is regulatory so patients, customers are safe, because there's a lot of products out here that are not safe and people are going to be in harm's way.
That's true. Maybe we should.
It does feel a lot like we're just. Sorry, Mike.
No, I was going to say, sorry to interrupt. Growth doesn't necessarily come without a cost.
Yeah.
So, the idea that just because it's growing, that it's some kind of win, to your point, Cherissa, a lot of this is about doing it the right way, doing it with a methodology, and also, Aubrey, to your point, in a uniform way that can feed on itself. So it's not just the same starting from scratch. I think that's a really good point. Instead of being hopeful for the future, we have to be practical about the today as we go into the future. I think that's a really good point. I'm sorry, James, you were saying?
No, I mean, actually, it's a good add on to what you were saying there, because, I kind of agree with Cherissa. I think it's a freaking hot mess right now out there. And I think most of these politicians and most of these legislatures are tripping forward, have no idea anything about this industry or how it functions or anything. And they're writing all the rules. And surprisingly, it's a freaking hot mess. I mean, you have those problems with the products down in Louisiana. You got no regs in Oklahoma. Who knows what's happening there? There's like all this insanity all over the place. And the thing I keep coming back to is it's an old boys network giving handouts to the politicians who are writing the rules. And that's what's still happening. And until we fix that, it's going to keep happening. Unfortunately, I think we're still going the path of like when alcohol, legalized, we're on the same exact path. And if you look at even how we're rolling it out, how the different states are writing their own regs, most people don't know that we're not federally legal for alcohol. Like every state writes their own rules, and states have interstate compacts that they're trading, that they're able to do commerce with each other. But like I joke about it, but the highest volume total wine in the entire country is in Delaware. All the restaurants and everyone from Philly and Jersey that come there and buy it, they're all breaking the law because they're bringing it back for commercial purposes in other states. Yeah. I think cannabis goes very similarly, unfortunately, and I've been very disheartened. I've had to work with a lot of the legislators and a lot of the politicians. They, in fact, don't know anything about this industry. That's been my experience. And they are getting handouts regularly from a lot of the local businesses. And it's very depressing. And someone who's trying to do the business the right way, someone who is doing the business the right way as best as you can and doing it with integrity, following the rules, taking care of your employees, we are completely disadvantaged by everyone, frankly. It's easier to break the law, hurt people, put shitty stuff into the market than it is to follow the rules and do it the right way. That's our problem as an industry. In my opinion, I think standardization is key, but we got to get the greed out of it down at the local level. And I don't know how to do that, unfortunately, but I do, I'm hopeful, but like, I'm also not a little hopeful. Like I think we're still people, and I think it's going to be messy, continue to be messy for a while. And I come back to why we started this call, hire vets, like legitimately, like it's not going to be a straight line anytime soon. If anyone thinks it is, they're fooling you. New York's about to come online. No one has any idea how that's going to go. Jersey, going to be a hot mess. So like we have no idea how this is going to go. Nope. You're going to need flexibility and decisiveness, people that tell the truth, that don't steal from you, and that get stuff done. Initiative-based decision making, mission type orders, commander's intent. Hire vets. They will be able to work in this environment extremely well. Teach them the skills they need. I've taught my people the skills. I mean, this is cannabis. I mean, we're all learning as we go here. Anyone says they're not is lying to you. Again, we're all figuring this out and building the industry together in real time. So that's my last pitch. Thanks, Mike.
And I think too, James, what's happening is while all of this is happening and this is a hot mess across the country, it's also giving cannabis a bad name, right? So we're trying to show how positive cannabis is and how it is saving and changing the lives of veterans, but then everybody's a hot mess. So who wants to trust the system? Nobody's going to want to trust the system. So at the end of the day, what are we fighting for? If we can't get regulatory measures in place, if things are not standardized, just like what we learned in the military, if there's not any SOPs in place, if things are not cookie cutter, here the 1, 2, 3s, ABCs of how to do this in this industry, it's going to get a bad name. And who's going to want to trust and be in the industry if they know all of this chaos is happening? And if they move from state to state, then you got to learn the laws and the rules and the rules of engagement for another state. It can be one of those things that just, like you said, James, very disheartening, and we're like, just forget it. I don't want to go through it. But we as advocates got to keep pushing forward. But that's what I see is happening. It's going to give cannabis a bad name if we don't get this right.
Well, who better to navigate that mess than vets, right? I feel as though it's chaos, but bit by bit, step by step, you can't create an SOP if you don't start somewhere. Yep. And then you just keep making it better. And I think that veterans are the best at chipping away, making adjustments, keep improving, always room for improvement. And I think that hopefully the market will flood and we'll get some small business owners, some veterans in here to create great companies with great products. Yep.
I think we're at time, but thank you so much for all the time. I think, the interesting thing is when we talk about the growth of the space, the biggest issue is special interest. I can't think of that ever being a terminology that exists in the military with military service members, because it's a unit, it's a unified front. And more importantly, to all your point, the idea of adaptability, flexibility, agility, loyalty, those are the sorts of things that will kind of rectify the systemic issues that cannabis absorbs, not that it creates. A lot of people think our issues are self-inflicted versus the truth of the matter, which is we're trying to rectify something that's taken decades. In terms of impacting, a whole host of different communities. And now for the idea of it being inadvertently or disproportionate, or even just kind of making veterans feel disenchanted about being in the space, I think our task is pretty simple, which is keep having conversations like this. So again, thank you for today. Thank you for your service prior to the cannabis space, the good fight that you have right now while you're in it. Again, I want to say thank you, Cherissa, Aubrey, James. Thank you for the time today. And for everyone out there, thank you for attending. We will be circulating this and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.